Hello to everybody. Today is the 30th of October 2020, and today I'm going to talk about three letters that somehow came to mean a lot to me, and those letters are DEA. Now, of course, DEA are the first three letters of a six-letter word, deacon, and also it's the abbreviation of the Drug Enforcement Administration, the agency in which I work. It's a law enforcement agency, federal law enforcement. I worked there for 27 years. So is this a coincidence that DEA was part of my life? Was God trying to tell me something? I think it's a coincidence, actually. I really think it's a coincidence. But what I'm going to speak about today is how I came to become a DEA agent, and a little bit about my job in the 1980s, which was it doesn't seem that long ago, but it's actually almost 40 years ago now, 35 years ago that I started as a DEA agent. And I had been interested in law enforcement from the time I was in high school. Of course, my grades were not good in high school. I really never applied myself, so I went into the Marine Corps. And I got out and I went in the Navy. And after I left the Navy, I tried to apply to several law enforcement agencies in California, and for various reasons they turned me down. So my second course of action then was to go to the university on the GI Bill, which I had because I had enlisted before January 1st, 1977. So I had the old GI Bill, and I also had, in Illinois, you had the Illinois Veteran Scholarship, which, as long as you went to a state university, paid your full tuition. So all I really had to pay for was room and board. So I went to Western Illinois University in Macomb because they had a law enforcement administration program. And again, I was a little disappointed that I couldn't start off immediately on leaving the military, but as it turned out, it was providential. It was very good that I was able to go to college, because had I not graduated from college, I would never have been able to become a DEA Special Agent. And my goal in going to college was primarily to become a police officer. Now, obviously, I knew narcotics investigators and homicide investigators, they existed, but you always had to enter through law enforcement, through the uniform patrol ranks, and then work your way into a detective job. I never thought that I would enter a federal law enforcement agency as a criminal investigator. That just was something that was beyond anything that I expected. And as I was in the last year of college, I would go over to the library and look at the Police Chief magazine, because it had job vacancies. This is long before the internet. This is 1983, 1984. So you're looking at different job vacancies, and Metro-Dade, today I think they call it Miami-Dade, they were always hiring. And they had a recruitment thing where the Dallas police came to the university and would offer to give you an expedited testing process. And the same thing with LAPD. And I considered those. I applied to the home county, my home county, which was DuPage County, to become a deputy sheriff. And there was good points to that and bad points. The good point, would be fairly easy job to get, I think. One of the bad points, you had to start in the county jail. And if you weren't politically connected, and trust me, I've never been politically connected, you'd start at midnights in the county jail, which was going to be a barrel of fun. So I applied there, and that had the usual police procedure for applications. You filed your application, you took a written exam, then if you passed that, you went to take a PT test, a physical test, and then there was an oral interview panel with the Sheriff's Department commissioners, who were civilians who were supposed to, they called it the Merit Commission, I think, and their job was to decide whether you would go on to further testing. And then there was a psychological test, a background, a polygraph, and then the sheriff interviewed you last. And that was your entry into the department. And then they would swear you in, and you'd start in the jail before they even sent you to the academy. You had to work in the jail because that's where the vacancies were. Now, again, going back to when I was in college, and concurrently I put in an application. I saw a vacancy in there for DEA in Houston. And I really didn't know a lot about DEA or, again, federal law enforcement in general. I knew about the FBI, but I knew DEA existed, the Drug Enforcement Administration, but I didn't know too much about it. So I called the number in DEA Houston. They said, no, you have to apply to Chicago because you're in Illinois. Okay. So I called the DEA office in Chicago and spoke to the special agent recruiter. And he told me to fill out the standard federal application forms, which I completed on my Selectric typewriter, along with a copy of my college transcripts, and I sent it off. Now, one thing that I did benefit from my time in the military, number one, you get veterans preference on a federal job. Number two, I matured quite a bit. And by the time I was in Western Illinois University, I almost got straight A's, despite the fact that I kind of spent my evenings not necessarily studying, but I studied enough and applied myself enough where I would get straight A's. When I was in high school, you got to be kidding. I mean, I was like in the lower half of the class. I had wanted to go to a service academy. That there was no way they were going to take me. I mean, I had to enlist as a private. But in college, I was, I had matured. I had turned my life around to a certain extent. I knew that I didn't want to be an enlisted man in the military. Not that there's anything wrong with being an enlisted man. I just didn't want to do that. I wanted something else. So I sent everything off, and Agent Smith, I think was his name, was the Robert Smith, if I remember correctly. He was the special agent recruiter. He said, you got everything? And then they sent me a letter saying, don't call us, we'll call you. And I figured that's the end of it. They're never going to call me because I really don't have any police experience. Why would they call me? And I'm still a college student. And yeah, I'm a veteran, but they're certainly not going to call me to be a special agent. Well, what happened is I graduated college. I began my job with the DuPage County Sheriff's Department, midnights in the jail. And then I get a phone call at around October, around this time, 1984, from the special agent recruiter in Chicago, and they sent out a package. And in there was some paperwork, the sensitive position application form, which is your background investigation. There was a medical exam that they wanted me to go to my private doctor and have a medical exam, and then to call the special agent recruiter for an interview. So I said, what have I got to lose, right? So I called up. I didn't think I was going to get the job, but scheduled the interview. He said, be sure to get your physical in, because if you don't get your physical in and you wait for the government to pay for your physical, you may not, in fact, make the deadline. There was like a 10-day deadline afterward. Now, this isn't a PT test. This is a physical exam by a physician. So at any rate, I had that done. And then I brought it all in at my interview. And they called me in, and there was Special Agent Smith and Special Agent Patricia Collins, who sat on my interview panel. And decades later, I would end up working for Special Agent Collins in headquarters, and I always reminded her, whenever you have a problem with me, there's one reason, and that's because you hired me. You should never have hired me. It was a mistake. But the interview was not bad at all. Unlike law enforcement panels where, like on the sheriff's department, they throw you all these hypothetical questions and you had no idea what to answer. You just try to answer it as best you can and explain it. They were pretty easy with me. And they just said, if they start doing your background, that's a good sign. And if they start doing your background, that means they're going to hire you. And we can't say whether you're going to be hired or not, but we're in a big hiring process right now. So, continue with the program. So I did. I went back to my old, my job on the sheriff's department. Didn't hear anything from them. I didn't expect to hear anything from them. I expected I'd be getting a letter eventually saying, thank you, but no thanks. We've decided that we're not going to hire you. And that wouldn't have surprised me because I didn't have any police experience. My experience is working in the jail. Well, come June of 1985, actually it was May, I started the academy at the Cook County Sheriff's Department Academy, which the DuPage Sheriffs paid for. And I hadn't told them that I had applied for the DEA because I didn't think it was a big deal, and I didn't think DEA was going to hire me. So I went through the 10-week academy and completed that in July. It was 400 hours of training at the time for the Illinois standards of law enforcement. And I went back to work at midnights in the jail. And I was, fairly happy with the job. I would have stayed there. I would have worked my way out of the jail to the patrol and, It was a good department. It was an agency where you could do a lot of different things. Unlike a municipal police department in suburban Chicago, what are you going to do in the suburbs? You're going to be on patrol. They might have one or two detectives. The sheriff's department was bigger. So I was happy with that. And then I come in one night, and the lieutenant calls me in, and he goes, I got to tell you something. An FBI agent called, and I'm going to meet with them tonight. They want to interview me about you. Okay, what's that about? Well, did you apply for a job with the FBI? And I said, no. I applied for a job with the DEA, but I didn't figure they're ever going to hire me. Well, I'm going to give them a good recommendation for you, even though we just sent you to the academy. I had you on the list here to go to the breathalyzer school in Evanston at the some police management institute up in Evanston, but I'm going to take you off that because I think they're going to hire you. So at any rate, the FBI agent came out and interviewed the lieutenant, and they were surprisingly, not angry with me, which is what I thought. And actually, guys started teasing me a little bit, saying, you probably don't want that job. They're going to send you far away from home, and you get a lot of naysaying at that point. You've got this job here. It really isn't that great a federal job. And then other people said, no, go ahead and take it. Well, I don't know. I still had no idea what was going to happen. Well, late August then, I got home and I went to bed, and the phone rings at about 10:30 in the morning, and I get out of bed. Because again, I work midnights to 8, so I get home about 9 o'clock. I hit the sack. I get up about 2 in the morning. Or 2 in the afternoon, but it was like 2 in the morning actually, because you're tired all the time when you're on midnights. But I answered it. It was a lady in DEA headquarters. It said, we're going to offer you a job as a basic agent trainee, GS7. You're to report on September 1st to the DEA building in Chicago. I said, well, where are they going to send me? She goes, I can't tell you that. That isn't known. But I can tell you that you're scheduled for BA Class 40, Basic Agent 40. And that'll take place, it'll begin on November 3rd, 1985, and it'll be held at Quantico. We've just changed our training area from Glencoe, Georgia to Quantico, Virginia. And you'll be in the second class that's there, but you're to report on the first to the federal building in Chicago as a GS7. So that's great. Okay, I take the job. And they said, you'll be getting something in the mail in a couple of days, a telegram, and then another packet of paperwork. And with that packet of paperwork came a PT booklet telling you how to PT and be prepared for the academy. Well, one good thing that I had going for me was that in my years of college, and I had just finished a police academy, I was in excellent physical condition. And this turned out to be really, really good. Because they did at that time, in 1985, the DEA did not give PT tests to applicants. You got your PT test after you were hired and went to the academy. You got it on day 2 or 3 of the academy, and it wasn't just a simple PT test. This wasn't like, run a quarter of a mile or something like that. There were 5 events on that PT test. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So at any rate, I decided, well, should I put in a letter of resignation with the sheriff? Should I stay with the sheriff? And again, my mom and dad, I'm living at home. You don't know where they're going to send you. You might get killed, this, that, and the other. I might get killed in the jail. I mean, I'm working with, really bad people in the jail. I'll give it a shot. The worst that can happen is I don't pass the training or something like that, and I just get another police job. So I put in my letter of resignation for the sheriff's department, and then the first week of September, I reported to the federal building in Chicago. And they said, we're going to assign you to transcribe tapes because there's nothing else that you can do. I said, well, I was a police officer in the state of Illinois. I can carry a firearm. No, you can't carry a firearm. What you're going to do is transcribe tapes until November 3rd, and then we're going to send you to the academy. Well, what I managed to do is I managed to talk my supervisor to let me have a couple of hours each day to go to the DEA gym, and then I would run up and down Lakeshore Drive to really prepare myself for this academy. Because what I had been told by all of the agents, Nancy Evans was one of the agents actually, that the PT program that you're going to undergo. It's going to be very difficult. It's like comparable to, really harder than the military, and harder than that in a state and local police academy. So by the time I reported to the academy, I flew out on November 3rd, and Walter Mondale was on the plane. Just 1 year before, he had been creamed in the election by Ronald Reagan. I figured maybe I should go introduce myself, right? But no, I got off the plane, we got on a bus, and my whole class was on that bus, and they took us down to Quantico, and you have to report in a suit. And the academy was, it was our first few days in the academy. They give you your administrative orientation. And then on the second or third day, they gave us the PT test. And this was the PT test that they really should have given us and now give before you're hired. And it involved 5 events that all had to be done in 1 hour. It was really the FBI agent's PT test, because at the time plans were underway that they were going to more or less merge the DEA into the FBI somehow or another. And that's why we were using Quantico as our training. The FBI would be in charge of our firearms, our PT, defensive tactics, and legal. And DEA would handle the drug classes and basically be the coordinator for the academy. But much of what we did was FBI training. Okay, and the PT test was graded by FBI instructors. The DEA instructors said there's no way they could pass that. A lot of them were older guys. Not, I thought older, mid-30s, early 40s, old, right? But they were out of shape, and, we'd say, Mr. Parks, why don't you run with it? No way, you got to be crazy. You think I can do that? Well, a lot of the guys in there and girls who showed up couldn't do it. It was 5 events: pull-ups, push-ups in 2 minutes, where you could only rest in the up position, and you had to go all the way down. And they really graded it strictly. Sit-ups in 2 minutes with your hands behind your head. It was a 180-yard shuttle run, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then a 2-mile run. And a third of the class failed it. A lot of them had negative points. A lot of them had to resign and go home. They were so bad. They were told that there's no way you're ever going to be able to pull your score up in the 3 months that you're here. We don't have the time to get you in shape, and you have like -5, -10. So that, went to, again, the agency's preparation, and, why they didn't give this test to people before they sent them or before they offered them the job, because a lot of them had quit their jobs, and now we're kind of high and dry. You flunked the PT test. And again, at the time, the maximum age was 35. 34 was the maximum age. You had to be hired before your 35th birthday. I just turned 26, so I had plenty of time to go. But a lot of these guys that were in my class were 33, 34 years old men, right? Yeah, I'm 61 now, old men. But again, they didn't pass the PT test, nowhere near passed it, and they got sent back. So I was, and some of the others who were borderline, they had to work like dogs throughout the whole academy so that they could keep their score where it was and pass it. And again, it was the toughest PT test in terms of, I've been in the Marine Corps, been in law enforcement. It was the hardest PT test that we ever had. With regards to the academy, how did I find that to be? And I found that, we saw the FBI agent, the new agents, and the way they would treat the DEA agent trainees. And there was a huge difference. We were treated much more harshly by the DEA instructors than the FBI new agents were treated. And I think a lot of the harsh treatment, a lot of the BS that they put us through was really unnecessary. There were some mind games that they would play with you. And to an extent, they were trying to make it like a military boot camp. But having been through the military and law enforcement, the job that we're being trained to do was nothing like being in the military. Okay, they're not training you to be a Marine private and storm a beach. They're training you to be able to think analytically, to think fast on your feet, to prepare cases for court, and screaming yes sir, no sir, and that kind of thing. It really is just a bunch of mindless stress. There was no real reason for it. And most of the men and women in there had some law enforcement experience. A lot had law enforcement and military, and a lot were older men and women too. And some of them just said, this is enough. I'm not putting up with this garbage because, I'm too old for it. And they went back. So in the first couple weeks, there's a huge dropout. People just leaving because they couldn't pass the physical, or they decided they weren't going to put up with the nonsense that we had to put up with in the academy. And the academy ran 6 days a week, Monday through Friday. Sundays were off, but towards the end, we had our practicals on Sundays too. So you get 7 days straight of training and very little rest. It was compressed into a 13-week period. The academics were fairly easy. It was all short-term memory. There really wasn't any great deal of reasoning or anything like that. You had to be able to learn what they taught, memorize it, and give it back. Every 2 weeks, they'd give you an exam. The legal was handled by the FBI, and they made sure we understood it. And they were compassionate toward us, more compassionate than the DEA instructors. The firearms. Okay, nobody failed in my class because of firearms. Now, the adequacy of the firearms training, the amount of training, the number of hours shooting was great. But what they issued us was a Model 65 Smith & Wesson stainless steel revolver. And we got a lot of training with the shotgun, the 12 gauge. Now, was this an adequate weapon? No. Okay. I reported to Miami on April 7th, 1986, with this weapon and a dump pouch with 6 rounds and a thin Kevlar vest. Okay. 5 days later, an FBI group was wiped out on the streets of Miami by a bank robber who was armed with a semi-automatic rifle. And he did this shooting is well known. It's well documented throughout history. The agents ran out of ammunition in some cases. Agents were killed as they were reloading their weapon, or their weapons jammed, or they... Basically what happened, it was demonstration that everything that we had been taught and the weapons that we had been trained on at the FBI Academy were not adequate, certainly in the streets of Miami, which was something that I suspected, when I reported down there. So the upshot of this was that the DEA and the FBI began a program where new weapons were issued. Very quickly, I received a 9mm submachine gun, which was pretty cool. And all of us went out and purchased semi-automatic pistols. I still carry my Glock 19 as my daily carry, but I purchased that. Of course, I still had my Smith & Wesson stainless steel revolver that they didn't replace for years. So again, the academy, at week 6, we found out where we were going, and most of my class was going to Miami, which turned out to be a great place to go. Of all the places to go, New York City would not be a good place to go as a GS7 new hire. LA would not be a good place to go, but Miami, the cost of living wasn't too bad. I called my girlfriend the day I got that and said, well, I'm going to Miami. And, we decided at that point that we were going to get married as soon as I returned, because there would be a 60-day period of time from my graduation on January 31st to the day I had to report to the Miami Field Division. And again, the job is best suited, I think. The men and women who had it easiest were those who were single, okay, or just newly married. You didn't have to sell a house, because if you had to sell your house, the government would not help you at that point, because you were not a previous government employee. Now, in subsequent moves, yes, the government would pick up some of that cost. But with regards to that, the number of drops in our class, I don't think there were any after the 4th or 5th week. They did zero in on a few guys that they decided they didn't like. The instructors did, and basically hounded them until they quit. These were guys that kind of had, I would say, obnoxious personalities. They weren't bad guys. They just had obnoxious personalities. I still remember the names, but I'm not going to share them. But, and I look them up every now and then just to see how they're doing or whatever. And they had been police officers and went back to being cops. But they were basically zeroed in on because they just annoyed the instructors. And the instructors would go out of their way to PT them, and they were borderline on that, and then they couldn't keep up with, they would assign them as case agents, because what we would have is practical training programs where there'd be a pretend case, and then the case agent would have to do all the DEA paperwork and turn it into the instructors, and they would so inundate these people that they couldn't keep up and they'd drop. Okay, so by probably the 5th, 6th week, we had our last drop, and we graduated on the 31st of January, just after the Challenger blew up, and that was a happy day. You know, of all the days in my life, when I graduated something, graduated college, graduated Marine boot camp, graduated 8th grade, ordained as a deacon, I was happier to get off of that place, the Quantico Academy, than I've ever been in my life. Because it wasn't a bad place, you know, but again, you have to live there, and it's, you know, you're secluded, but it's, you know, I was just happy to be done with it and to go back to Chicago. So that's how I'm going to finish this part of the video, and then as I continue on, I'm going to talk more about my career in DEA, and I'm not going to give up any of the trade secrets, but again, I'm talking about something that happened 30 years ago. But I'll talk to you a little bit about Miami and what my experiences were versus what probably people perceived a DEA agent in Miami's life to be like versus the reality. So I'm going to have that in the future videos. Okay, thanks.